Umpires in Major League Baseball are receiving more hate than they ever have in history, and it's pretty easy to understand why. On average, MLB umpires miss around 10 calls every single game, and while some argue that it's simply a part of baseball, most players and fans are straight up losing their minds. As a result, MLB is currently testing automated strike zones in the lower levels, meaning that bad calls could soon be a thing of the past. But first, we need to understand why umpires are so important to the game, and why they might not be as bad as most people think. Out of all sports, baseball is one of the most complicated in the world, and whether it be calling pitches behind the plate or making split-second decisions on the field, umpires play a part in every aspect of the game. Now, in some cases, if they're able to make the right calls, umpires draw no attention away from the game itself. However, this is not usually the case. Mistakes are bound to happen, and even though some calls can be overturned using replays, others are completely final once the call is made on the field. For example, in a game against the Pirates, Bryce Harper was called out on strikes after this check swing, which is obviously not the right call based on replays. However, this is one of the many plays in baseball that can't be reviewed, so it's solely up to the umpire on the field to make a decision. And for some reason, the same thing applies for the most important aspect of the entire game, which are balls and strikes. Across MLB, home plate umpires are accurate around 94% of the time, which sounds pretty decent at first. However, the main problem lies in the drastic difference between the best umpires and the worst umpires. And unsurprisingly, age is a key factor. And one of the worst examples of this is Angel Hernandez, who's currently in his 60s. On April 24th of 2022, Hernandez called a strike on a ball that missed the zone by almost 7 inches. This was the worst call by any umpire in the entire season. But the rest of that game was not great either, as only 77% of his called strikes were actually strikes. So, as you could imagine, frustration among players and fans was building throughout the entire game, leading up to this missed call in the 9th inning of a 1-run game.
Here comes. Called strike 3, and Schwarber is thrown out of the game, and he had zero issue with getting thrown out.
But somehow, this is not even his worst game, as that would come only a year later. In a game between the Nationals and the Pirates, Hernandez called strikes on 12 balls that were out of the zone, resulting in a called strike accuracy of just 65%. And understandably, people were extremely upset after the game. However, as frustrating as games like this are, it's important to understand the difference between accuracy and consistency. Despite Hernandez only being accurate on 84% of pitches, his zone was 91% consistent throughout the game. Now, of course, it's still annoying for both players and fans when umpires consistently make bad calls. But no matter how bad an umpire is, the zone is usually the same for both teams, making it at least somewhat fair. However, the biggest problem is that when it matters, a single missed call can make or break an entire game. In 2018, there were 55 games that ended on a missed call, and even though baseball is a long season, this is a major issue. Every single game matters, and even a blown call to end a game in April could be the deciding factor on whether or not a team makes the playoffs. Take for example this game between the Blue Jays and the Yankees on April 12th of 2021. The Blue Jays are down by 2 in the bottom of the 9th with 2 outs, with the winning run at the plate. However, any hope that the Blue Jays had is taken away out of nowhere. A strikeout is called on a ball well below the zone, and the game is over. Now, at first, this may seem pretty insignificant in such a long season, but it ended up being much more important than they realized. In October of that same year, the Blue Jays were eliminated from playoff contention in the last week of the season. They ended up finishing 1 game out of the last wildcard spot, which was held by none other than the Yankees. Now, of course, there's no guarantee that that game would have ended any differently if that pitch was called correctly, but we'll also never get to know. And with the way postseason baseball usually goes, who knows what the Blue Jays could have done had they taken that final spot. Situations like this add up over the course of a season, and another example happened that same year in a matchup between the Red Sox and the Yankees. Once again, it's bottom of the 9th with 2 outs, but this time the winning run is at third base for the Yankees.
Winning run at third, the 3-2. Oh my goodness, Barnes gets a call on a curveball to send this game into extra innings.
And the Red Sox go on to win in extra innings. Now, you might be wondering, why doesn't MLB just fire the worst umpires and replace them with better ones? And I thought the same thing, but unfortunately, it's just not that simple. No matter how badly an umpire performs, their job is still fairly safe due to the Umpires Union, which is basically just there to protect umpires in the event of controversial calls. As a result, MLB is much more lenient than others when it comes to grading an umpire's performance. Take for example one of the games I mentioned earlier, where according to umpire scorecards, Angel Hernandez was only accurate 88% of the time. However, according to MLB, his score was 96% for that same game. So why are these two scores so much different? Well, apparently, MLB gives umpires a margin of error of 2 inches, which allows them to get away with a majority of their mistakes, and for the most part, makes it almost impossible to get rid of umpires based on performance. But really, not every umpire is this bad. Both players and fans tend to only focus on the bad umpires, and most fail to realize that a lot of umpires are actually pretty good. In 2008, umpires across MLB were only accurate around 81% of the time. However, just 14 years later, that number was 92.4%, meaning that incorrect calls had been cut by nearly 60%. In fact, despite missing around 23,000 calls in 2023, it was their best season ever. So despite what most people believe, umpires are actually getting better as time goes on. And a great example of this came in 2022, when umpiring history was made during Game 2 of the World Series. On October 29th, Pat Hoberg was behind the plate for the second game between the Astros and the Phillies. And throughout this game, he called 129 balls and strikes, with 100% accuracy. Now, to be fair, this is the only perfect game for an umpire in history, but it does show that not every umpire is terrible. However, it's possible that in the near future, perfect games for umpires will become an everyday occurrence. As you may know, MLB has been testing robo-umps in the minor leagues for the past few years. And if you don't know, here's a quick explanation. Robo-umps are basically cameras around the field that tell the home plate umpire through an earpiece if a pitch is a ball or a strike. Now, at first, this seems like the obvious solution to the problem, as bad calls would suddenly become a thing of the past. However, at the same time, skills like framing pitches would suddenly become irrelevant. Not to mention, baseball would most certainly lose some of its entertainment value. At this point, MLB definitely has the technology to make it happen, as it's already made its way all the way up to AAA, but the results are pretty mixed so far. One coach said that nobody complains about the strike zone anymore, but you're also losing some of the human emotion of the game. It's kind of entertaining to watch a guy argue. So as you can tell, not even a perfect umpire can make everyone happy. However, an automated umpiring system still seems inevitable at some point, it's just a matter of when. But for now, umpires are doing their best to keep improving every single year. So despite how frustrating they can be, it's important to remember how difficult the job actually is, and that without technology, perfection is almost impossible.